most of us, when we start our property buying journey, I don't even want to call it investing journey, because we don't even know that that's what we're doing.
Yes.
You're just buying a roof over your head. You are trying to house yourself and your family. And I don't know about you, but I started my property journey by buying in my personal name.
I think that's a journey that most of us go through. You know, you get to the point whereby maybe you've rented for a little bit and you now feel like you're ready to buy your own home, or maybe you are ready to buy a home for your family. So in most instances, we go and we buy the home that we want. We get financing from the banks in most instances. And that is really our first exposure to property. I went along the very same journey.
Absolutely.
And I went and I rented for the first year when I started working. Then the second year of my working life, I was like, no, I actually want to buy a property. So I then went and I looked for the property that I wanted. I found it. And then I applied for it, I signed the offer, applied for banks and all of that. And that is how I started my property journey. Soon afterwards, when I started realizing that I could actually buy more properties, I then went and bought the second property, which was now going to be for rental and not for living.
Still.
In my name still, because that's all I knew. That's all I knew, right? And I didn't even know that there was something called buying in your name. Like, you just buy a property. I didn't even know that there were options, right?
Yeah.
All I knew was that I wanted to buy another property. That's all that I knew. And I followed what I had done with the first one.
Okay.
And then
fortunately, it worked.
It worked. I got the second one, right?
Okay.
So, yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people do that. Maybe let's say you buy your first home and now you want to buy a rental property. Some people go through the same thing. So for me, I think the property bug had bitten and now I wanted more. When I started inquiring, the bank told me, sorry, you have reached your ceiling in terms of the properties you can buy. So I was obviously crushed by that.
Yeah. I want to tell you, a friend of mine who moved to the US and he had properties here in the northern suburbs, and he was telling me with lots of pride, he works in the investment world. And he says, I'm very upset. I'm leaving and I'm flying on Friday. I was hoping the bank is going to approve my application for a third property, and they are telling me I'm overgeared. I remember how he left me with this overgeared, and I went and looked it up and I'm like, so he's got one property, two properties. Third property couldn't be approved because he's overgeared. And that was the end of the story. And he's the investment maverick, right? He's just overgeared, and that was it. And that means he had never been exposed to the term of how do you structure property investing? How can you do the same thing that you are doing but differently? And the minute people speak the English of overgear, remember your first time you heard me, was my irritation about the finance world is how everybody talks about structuring and overgeared. What does it even mean? And let's tell people about the different and the various options about structuring. What's the term structuring?
No, absolutely. And I think before we even get to the term structuring, I think it's just about the lack of awareness from the beginning in terms of what is it that you want to do, right? I think the important thing is to start with a goal, right? What is it that you want to achieve? Because the structures are answering a question of what problem are you solving? Because if you just want to buy a home for your family and your children, maybe just buying the property in your name is sufficient for you, right? And maybe even buying a second rental property is sufficient. You can buy it in your name. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But if you are then deliberate in that you want to build a property portfolio, that is when the question of structuring now comes in, because you are deliberate in that you want to have a multi-million rand portfolio. You are not content with just one or two properties.
Absolutely.
That is when it kicks in. That is why your friend, when he was on his third property and he wanted to go to his fourth property, he then ran into problems, right? So for one or two, maybe you could be okay. But then when you start thinking beyond that, that's when you need to think, okay, now I'm creating substantial wealth, or I'm on the path of creating substantial wealth. How do I now make sure that I'm able to get there in the most efficient way and that it is protected properly? Because I don't think that's something that we even think about, is to say, yes, you are working, you're creating all this wealth, even if you're just earning income. But how do I protect it? Especially if your goal, right, back to the goal, is to leave it for future generations.
Absolutely.
How do you then protect it and how do you then transfer it? Because it's all good and well to accumulate these properties and these massive amounts of wealth. But the question is, if your goal is to transfer it to future generations, how do you do that?
Yeah, we don't think about legacy. And I think our commonality in that, the minute you become a parent, you are constantly thinking, or at least if you are a planner, you're constantly thinking, if I pass away and they are still less than 18 and 21, how is this going to work? If I pass away when they are post 21 and I've got multiple properties, how do I pass it on to them and not have them waste? Because we also don't want them to start where we started,
Exactly.
right? We don't want them to start with mistakes. You don't want them to start with buying your first property and struggling to pay the rent or struggle to pay the mortgage. So let's tell people about what this whole structuring means, because we became moms, and the minute you become a mom, there is a certain level of awareness that you want to put in your buying anything.
Absolutely.
Anything, right? Even the house you are living in, yes, it's in the personal name, but we have structured it so that it is left to the kids in a certain way. It doesn't cause them hardship, even at death, because my goodness, the estate duties. Let's talk about these structures.
All right. So when we're talking about the term structures, there are different kinds of structures. And so you need to know when is it appropriate to use which one. Right? So you as an individual, right, you can go and approach the banks and apply for funding, which is what most of us do. We apply for a home loan, usually our first one, right? So you go and then you then sign the bond and you buy the property in your name. Me as Lindile, you as Miranda, you buy the property, right? However, there are other structures which are what we call legal entities. Yeah. And what legal entities are, they almost replicate you as a person, but they're not really you. Okay? In that they can sign their own contracts, they can buy and sell assets, they can do a lot of things. So it's essentially, if you are able to create structures, you are able to replicate yourself multiple times. Yeah. And if you are able to replicate yourself, it means that what Silindile can do, she can do 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 over and over again. Yeah. Which means that if, for example, Silindile qualifies for 2 million rand, if I've got the right structures in place, I can go and create a structure one, use the 2 million rand in that structure, and then do it again in that structure. And that is why we started with, it's important for you to understand your end goal. So if you are saying you want to create wealth and you want to use it through property, you need to have the conversation around structures. How do you use structures correctly? So what are they? We've been mentioning them a lot. Yeah. The first one is the individual, which is me and you, right?
Me and you.
I can buy a property in my name. We can go and buy a property together, both as individuals. We are individuals, right? The second one is we can go and open a company. Yeah. So let's use an example where me and you want to go and buy a property together. The option one is we can go and buy it together as individuals in our names. And maybe it could be you and your partner, you and your friend, you and your mom, or whatever the case might be, right?
But you register a company.
You register a company, right? So that company is the one that goes and buys the property and enters into an agreement with the bank, right? So that's the second option. And the third one is a trust.
The way I like trust, the way everyone talks about trust, people talk about trust in I think the incorrect way. Everyone thinks a trust is because you have so much money, but a trust is an aspiration of wealth.
Yes,
it's a beautiful, beautiful, glorious mechanism that you can move your assets into, all your properties into. It's absolutely great, but it's absolutely great in maintenance, right?
Yes, absolutely. And you'll notice that a lot of the really super wealthy have trust, right? Because trust. Remember, when you've set an intention of creating wealth, or you know that you're on the path to wealth, that is when these things start becoming important. Yeah. How do I keep my wealth? How do I pass it on? And then you consult specialists that are going to help you to advise it. And that is why the fourth structure, what we call hybrid. right? So do you want to tell them about what a hybrid structure is?
A hybrid structure is when we enter into a different, let's say, special purpose vehicle. Let's talk about the malls, for instance. Malls are owned by multiple people, guys. My company, Miranda Company, can get into an agreement with Trust Sentin, for instance, Sentin Mall, and we all contribute to this buying and building of a mall. Slee can come in, whoever Tato, whoever Tabo, whoever we all contribute to the building of Sentin. And that's exactly how these malls are built. They are built on trust, they are built on companies, pension funds of different companies, and individuals who have registered companies. It's a hybrid model. Myself and Slee can also go enter into an agreement. She's got Slee Property Company, Miranda Property Company, and we want to buy a certain building with 45 apartments. These two companies can enter into an agreement and they can buy that property. That doesn't stop me as Miranda to buy other assets. That doesn't stop Miranda Property Company from buying other assets, but we co-own that other 45 apartment structure. So don't let anyone confuse you about the English of structuring and whatever. But what you need to utilize it for is know which one to use and when.
Exactly.
Right? And the trust is there to protect the estate, to protect whatever you have. You can imagine people who own multiple Pick and Pays. How do you think the owner of Pick and Pay protected his assets? He built a trust, and the different trusts have got different mechanisms. Here he is gifting the grandchildren, but he is going to keep that wealth for years and years and years. And that's why you have the Pick and Pay thriving for all these years, right?
Yeah.
So for us, what is also important is that each structure has got its benefits. And that is exactly why we have the Khumo Property Investment Academy, because then we unpack for you how you utilize and where to go when you want to see what are the benefits.
Absolutely. And I think back to what you're saying is sometimes when you first get exposed to this property investment world, they will push, for example, to say, create a trust first, do this first. And, without necessarily understanding your goals and your current situation. So there is no perfect structure. And you don't need to have a particular thing before you can buy a property. I think the important thing is to understand your goal. Where do you want to get to? And understand how each of them works to see which one is best for you, right? So that's very important to unpack all of that, because you may find that you lock yourself into something and then it ends up not working for you. So it's very important. We also work with specialists within the academy who will be able to guide and help you structure your things properly, because it could be as simple as even just making sure that your will is up to date, which is also an important factor. So in terms of the benefits really of structuring, once you understand your end goal and you are clear that your end goal is to create wealth. And yes, our focus here is on property investing, but this includes all sorts of wealth. Even if you've got a business or you've got other income that or shares or anything like that, it's very important that if you are deliberate about creating wealth, you think about structuring, and because it is the foundational block. Because if you want to, for example, have 1 or 2 properties versus if you want to have 20, this is important work. It's like building a single-story building versus the Burj Khalifa. You're not going to have the same foundation. It's not going to be the same foundation, right? So that's important, and that's the foundational stuff. So make sure that you understand and you set yourself up correctly from the beginning. So the important benefits of thinking about these things and implementing them is, the first thing is going to be your access to funding. And I think earlier on in the video, we mentioned how in my instances, I bought the first and second property and then I hit a ceiling. I could no longer get access to money because my salary could not allow me to take on more debt because I had reached the ceiling. If you start creating structures and entities, it opens up the funding funnels and opportunities that are available to you.
Wider. Oh my
It
gosh.
opens it up like this. Because now you have structured your affairs in such a manner that these taps of money start opening.
Absolutely.
And why is opening of tap money important? Because it means you can access more opportunities.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest benefit with structuring.
Yeah, and Slee, you're touching on something that we both didn't know the first 10 years of our working lives as well. Most people just know that when you're buying, you go to the big four banks. Structuring helps you to unlock 9 other places where you can
Absolutely.
apply for funding, guys. That is the power of what we do in the mentorship to show you. Only when you are a company can you go to the other alternative mechanisms of funding a property investment portfolio. And then the other benefit of structuring is what we just spoke about, asset protection. It is incredibly important. We've got minor children right now. So if, God forbid, we die this morning or today, whatever we have accumulated needs to be protected a certain way so that the legacy is passed on to our children, 1. 2, you do not have relatives with big claws grabbing on the stuff that you have built because you have protected it a particular way. Yeah. And thirdly, when you die, there's nothing as expensive as death.
Yeah.
Estate tax can almost wipe out whatever you have built unless you have structured properly. And only if you have structured will your children be protected. You can almost speak from the grave to say, when they are 10 to 18, I want you to pay education for them the following way out of the rental properties. I want you to sell property 1, or they can have access to the property and the rental money at a certain point. And when they turn 21, I want you to buy them a car, and nobody is allowed to sell those properties until they turn 25. You can almost speak from the grave. So asset protection. But this is what we do in the mentorship, and the reason why we use the specialists that we use in the academy is because they have taken us step by step and helped us to structure it for our mentees.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the other thing, other than, as they say, there are only 2 things that are certain in life, right? It's death and taxes.
Ouch.
We are all going to die,
Yep.
and we're all going to pay tax in one way or another. So in thinking about your affairs, I know tax is the last thing we think of, but it's the reality. So you find that, let's say for an example, and the main benefit here is the tax efficiencies of creating a structure. Because now, if you're buying the property in your individual name, right, it's adding on to your personal income, right?
Oh, yes.
And already, depending on your tax bracket, that could push you even higher in terms of the tax that you pay. But now, if you're thinking about creating a structure, that may actually allow you to pay lesser tax. And we work with the accountants in our power team that manage this for you so that it limits the amount of tax you are losing. Because now, essentially, if your things are not structured properly, for example, even if, let's say, Miranda and myself have got 2 identical properties earning the same amount of rental, one is in her individual name, one is in a structure, I might find I end up taking more home than she does, just because of the way that it is structured. So that's definitely another major consideration in terms of making sure that you make your tax affairs efficient by buying your properties in a structure. And one of the main goals, right, is the transferability.
Yeah.
So as parents, we may want to, buy properties for our children, buy them a home, but we don't think about what happens if you pass away. Because now all of your assets are tied into your name. They need to cover some of the debts you've got, and they may need to be transferred over to the next person. So, or to your children or whoever you have nominated. So you need to think about those things. Whereas if, for example, you wanted to give your children, even when you're still alive, access to those properties, you don't have to wait until you die. You can just simply, if it's in a company, give them shares in your business. And now all of a sudden they benefit. You don't even need to die for them to benefit from the
from there.
From that, or
portfolio.
even if you pass away and you transfer all your assets before you die, then there's no transfer duty to be paid, and there's no all these other taxes that will be payable upon your death.
But don't let us detract you.
Yeah.
This is what we do in the Khumo Property Investment Academy. Don't forget to sign up onto our mailing list so that you can get notification for our next mentorship intake, because we run several courses through the year. On the mailing list, you will get a notification about our mentorship dates. You will get a notification about our workshops or our online or our in-person workshops that we are planning for the year. So hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our mailing list and follow our YouTube. Any last words?
Yeah, absolutely. It may seem like it's a lot to take in, but in the mentorship program and in the workshops that we run, we take you through step by step so that it doesn't feel overwhelming. So absolutely, do join the mailing list. The description is below, and we look forward to seeing you.